Section 3024 of the CCR, Title 15, the list of rules and regulations that all inmates are expected to abide by and be familiar with in California prisons, regards business dealings conducted by inmates. Specifically, it reads, inmates shall not engage in business dealings or a profession while incarcerated unless authorized to do so by the warden. Purportedly, the purpose of this law is to prevent inmates from continuing to run criminal enterprises while they're incarcerated. But because it is so generally worded, and what the heck is a business dealing anyway, it's used in a lot of specific ways that may have been unintended under the original verbiage. For instance, if you have a prison hustle, perhaps you're a Maytag and you take in people's laundry for them, wash it. Or you're an electrician and you fix people's electronics whenever they break. Well, these things are all against the rules. They certainly qualify as business dealings. It's one general rule to shut down a lot of smaller behaviors. Additionally, if you want to come to some kind of arrangement with an inmate, perhaps you want to hire a bodyguard like Phil Spector did, well, it's obviously a business dealing and it's not something you can do above the board. And finally, if you have an actual business that is legitimate or a profession that you want to continue to conduct while incarcerated, perhaps you're a realtor and you can think of some way to continue to make a living while you're locked up, no. The administration, if they find out about it, will take steps to prohibit you from continuing to engage in your living. It's a business dealing. Of course, there are a lot of sub-rules and smaller steps that the administration takes in order to further prohibit inmates from conducting business. A common one is that inmates are not allowed to possess currency, money of any kind. If your people send you a couple $100, that's fine. You're absolutely allowed to have money sent to you. And the trust office, the section of the prison that is tasked with keeping track of inmates' money, will place the money that you receive into an electronic account. You can spend it at the prison canteen. You can even have them cut a check and send it to a third party. They'll mail it to anybody you want. It's your money. But there is no condition under which you are allowed to have access to the physical cash or the check itself. Rules or no rules, inmates find ways to get their hands on money. Whenever I started my term, 2001, cash was king. A lot of guys would have a $50 or $100 bill hidden somewhere, maybe rolled up really tight inside of the pen filler of a Bic pen or sewn into a pair of jeans or something like that. Cash doesn't take up much space if you really go to the effort of hiding it. By 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, cash was seen much less frequently. I actually saw a guy have a $50 bill and try to buy some dope from the local dealer and essentially be told, what the heck am I even going to do with this? Nobody uses cash anymore. And whittle the guy down to just receiving $30 worth of product for the $50 bill. The reason for this is that inmates had begun to engage in electronic money transfers using cell phones, and so you didn't see money so often. The administration knows inmates are going to find some way to conduct a business. A common one is books of stamps. They provide a simple and utilitarian manner of hiding currency. For myself, I like to always keep 10 books of clean stamps in an envelope in the back of my locker. I started doing this because in the first year that I was locked up, I had accidentally broken an electronic item of somebody's. Scooby had borrowed a nice pair of headphones from one of his friends to listen to some music. I'd been talking to Scooby and I'd sat down on his bed without thinking about it, and there was an awful crunch, and I looked down and I'd busted the guy's nice headphones. As it turned out, it was no big deal. He let me wait until the next time I went to canteen, and I gave him a couple of bucks, and no harm, no foul. But I spent a lot of time thinking about what could have went wrong. That the guy could have just put his foot down right then, talked about how valuable the things were, and tried to leverage me into a difficult situation because I didn't have any money on hand to pay him back with. A lot of guys would keep a couple of stamps here or there, and they had a lot of practical uses. A common one was buying tobacco. Not only are stamps easy to hide and they don't go bad and everybody recognizes them as having some intrinsic value, they're also easy to take out of the institution. So the officer who's bringing in a pack of cigarettes or a can of tobacco or whatnot every once in a while to hand off to an inmate can just trade the tobacco for an envelope full of clean books of stamps, put them in his lunchbox, walk out of the institution, and theoretically be able to turn those into cash on the other side of the wall. I've been describing the time period in 2009 or so, whenever the inmate with the most authority on the yard, the professor, and myself had set out to convince the millionaire music producer Phil Spector to buy freezers on the yard. There was a lot going on in this time period. I was the clerk back in the administrative area, and I received visits most every weekend from my wife and my newborn son. One thing that I haven't spoken about very much about this general time period is my cellie, AJ. I hate to generalize, but AJ was just the most stereotypical, what I think of whenever I say criminal or felon, that I met. He was tattooed up and down, and he had a rap sheet as long as your arm. He'd spent most of his life in prison, internalizing prison values. The time that he wasn't in prison, well, he would commit whatever burglaries he could, not because he couldn't function, but just because heroin is an expensive drug and he needed some way to maintain. He and I didn't get along very well. I don't mean we had a problem with each other or we disliked each other. It's just, I don't think we liked each other. Frankly, I thought he was a snake, and I think he knew I thought he was a snake. But he knew how to do time. He'd been locked up a lot, and he was a fine cellie. We got along. But I made a mistake. Early in our relationship, I'd seen that he was hurting. He needed some tobacco. He'd run out. And I told him, well, here, I got a book of stamps right here, man. You go get yourself a couple of cigarettes. No big deal. And then a week or two later, I did it again. And again. It's the case with something like this, whenever you're dealing with an addict, that they can become entitled very quickly. And it rapidly became the case that he felt that it was my responsibility somehow to give him stamps so he could get cigarettes. By the time that I was down to just 4 books of stamps in my emergency stash, I had to tell him, look, you got to quit asking. I don't have anything more for you. I'm tired of paying for your tobacco habit. Things got more tense after that. I got the feeling that he hadn't liked me to start with, and if I wasn't going to be providing something to him, well, he didn't want me around. So I put on my to-do list that weekend after talking to the professor on Saturday about getting a freezer installed on the yard. I needed to start looking for a new cellie. Additionally, I had to refill my emergency stamp supply. I only had 4 books in the back of the locker instead of my standard 10. And if I was going to be getting a new cellie, going to a new environment, and who knew what chaos was going to ensue, I wanted to have my reserves ready just in case I needed them. This wasn't going to be that difficult. I had some cosmetic items that had a good resale value. I think I had a couple of expensive deodorants in the back of my locker. And I knew somebody who did stamps as a hustle, buy, trade, sell, whatever. The professor. It made sense for him to have this as one of his side hustles because I've described him as very well put together, organized. He was able to go from one building to the next because of his job as the MAC rep. Additionally, he did legal work for people. He helped lifers prepare their lifer packets or things like it, and so he always had access to and might need a large amount of stamps. Legal work takes a lot of stamps. He was actually pretty generous about this. I'd seen him on more than one occasion just to help people, to help them without charging them anything. Additionally, his wife was a paralegal, and she looked out for him. I'm sure anything he needed, she provided to him. So he always had all the stamps that he might need, and that makes it easy to conduct business, buying, selling, trading, so long as you make a profit. That afternoon, on a Sunday, I knew that he was at some point going to be out on the yard. He was a MAC rep, so you could find him just about any day if you kept an eye open for him. I tossed my deodorants, my lunch, whatever the heck else I was going to take out to yard that day in a laundry bag, and went out to walk laps with my friend Zip Tie. Put my laundry bag under the bleachers. I really wasn't that worried about it being messed with or stolen or anything like it. It's a funny aspect of prison that in spite of the fact that you are surrounded by criminals, many of whom are literally petty thieves, there's very little petty theft. You can take an item of small value, a couple of deodorants or a book of stamps or your watch, and pretty much trust that if you leave it sitting on a table, it's going to be there whenever you get back. This is because prison is an environment where everybody is up in the other people's business, and some people are psychotic. It's quite reasonable you could end up literally being murdered over a stolen deodorant or a book of stamps. So it's just not worth it, by and large. I walked laps with Zip Tie until late in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock. I saw the professor. He had had a visit that day, apparently, and I didn't see him until they released visiting. Told Zip Tie I'd get at him later and peeled off. Hey, Professor, I need to get at you for a minute. I want to trade some deodorants for some stamps. It wasn't a big deal. We went over, he looked at my deodorants, and we bartered back and forth for just a moment, and he agreed he'd go get me the stamps. This is the way that business is often conducted in prison. Just a couple of words, a handshake, a quick barter, and it's good enough. I don't remember the exact trade that we made. I know that my deodorants were relatively expensive, but that cosmetics generally traded for only half of the value they were worth. And the books of stamps that I wanted from the professor sold at the post office for $7.50 or $8 or whatever they were at the time, but they were generally only worth $5 a piece on the yard. That was considered the value of a clean book of stamps. I'm sure we didn't quibble too much over a couple of pennies. The fact of the matter is that whenever you do business with somebody, the goodwill is generally not worth $1 one way or the other to play hardball, and everybody's pretty reasonable. After he came out and handed the stamps off to me and I put my stuff back under the bleachers, we walked a couple of laps because I had a question I wanted to ask him. You see, an acquaintance of mine, New York, had asked me if I knew how to set up a bank account as an inmate and have my money sent from the trust office to an actual physical bank. I had no idea. I knew this was something you could legally do, but I'd never done it. I knew the professor had. I knew he had a bank account. So I asked him if he could explain the process to me. As we were walking laps and he was explaining things like how to get a notary public to come see you and which banks had rules regarding accounts for inmates, there was a moment where the professor tensed just slightly and said, "Hey, Aaron, I think your cellie is getting into your bag that you left by the bleachers, and he's being pretty suspicious about it." He didn't draw attention to himself. He didn't look over and point. It was subtle. But sure enough, whenever I side-eyed it and saw what was going on, yeah, AJ was sitting at the bleachers kind of nudging my laundry bag with his foot off to the side so it would reach a place where it would be easier for him to get down and get into it. AJ and I did not have the type of relationship where it was okay for him to be digging through my stuff like that. And I was about 95% sure I was looking at him trying to figure out a way to steal from me. This thing where the professor pointed it out stood out to me for two reasons. First, the degree of situational awareness that the professor was displaying was phenomenal. Out of the corner of his eye and his peripheral vision from 200 feet away, he'd noticed this guy getting into my bag. And to be clear, it's not like AJ was hunched over the bag, elbow deep, looking around suspiciously. He was nudging it with his foot. Even whenever I looked over, I barely noticed what he was doing. Additionally, the professor had recognized AJ as my cellie. I didn't have a clue who the professor's cellie was, and I certainly couldn't have picked him out of a crowd from 200 feet away. I had some options here. I could keep walking laps, pretend like I hadn't noticed what was going on. Maybe sneak up behind AJ whenever he had his hand in my bag, catch him red-handed. Or if I really wanted to be clever about it, I could wait until after he'd walked off and then approach him, tell him, "Hey AJ, somebody stole some crap from me in my bag. Did you see anything?" And wait for him to lie himself into an even deeper hole before, "Well then what's up with that book of stamps I just saw you put in your pocket, homeboy?" But that really wouldn't be the smart move. Prison's a funny environment, and even if I catch this dude red-handed, unless I take flight on him right then, give him a nice ding to the dome, well, I'm still going to be stuck in a cell with him at the end of the day. I didn't change anything. All I did was make my situation worse because now he knows, I know he's looking to rip me off. So I decided to play dumb. Told the professor, lied perhaps unconvincingly. I said, "Well, that's okay. He's allowed to get into my bag. He's probably just getting some of my sandwiches, but I gotta go and talk to him, man. I'll get at you later. Oh, and don't forget to tell me what happens with the warden on Tuesday," I hollered back as I was walking off. I did what I could to approach AJ directly, meaning that he saw me walking up on him and had plenty of time to not get into my bag in front of me. I didn't want to catch him with his hand in the cookie jar, as it were. I gotta hand this to the dude. He was a good liar. There was not a trace of suspicion in his demeanor or his tone of voice whenever he saw me walk up. Just, "Oh, hey, Aaron, what's going on?" And I told him, "Hey, buddy, I'm just getting my bag." And he went, "Oh, yeah. Here, look, I've got," and he reached into his jacket, and he had a paper bag filled up with some food out of the prison kitchen. He had some sausage patties from that morning's breakfast. He explained he was hoping he could take that bag, and I would keep it in my bag under the bleachers until it was time to go in. This was a reasonable request, and it was quite understandable that he might have been messing with my bag. If I had walked up on him whenever he was doing it and he'd actually had my stuff in his hand, well, this would have been an understandable reason for him to be doing it. It could even be true, except that I knew it wasn't. The dude was trying to rip me off. I told him, "Yeah, sure, no problem, man. Here, put it in the bag." And he and I went about our day. He didn't mess with my stuff anymore after that, believe that I had half an eye on my bag for the next hour until yard recalled. We went inside. I chopped up some of the sausage patties that he'd got and an onion that I had, put them in a couple of soups, and we watched some garbage on TV, had a little spread. It was a good afternoon. Might as well have been friends, except that I moved getting a new cellie and not having anything to do with AJ right up to the top of my list of things to do that weekend. This isn't really that uncommon of an experience. Of course, none of us are likely to be at work and catch our coworker with our wallet in his hand, taking the money out of it. But the situation where you know that somebody is being two-faced with you, perhaps they're gossiping behind your back, or you know they're just waiting for you to screw up so they can leap in and take advantage of the situation, well, It's not always the wisest thing to open your mouth and call them on it, in spite of the fact that it would feel so good to jump up and point, go, aha, I caught you. At the end of the day, you're unlikely to improve the situation doing that. Sometimes you're just stuck in an environment with people who mean you ill. Perhaps your coworker is gossiping, or your mother-in-law makes a snide comment about how your house is a lot cleaner than she expected it to be. And you just have to bite your tongue. Well, all right. Try thinking like an inmate. Hold your cards close to your vest. Talk less. Listen more. After all, there will be plenty of time to say something that you regret tomorrow. So, if you happen to find yourself in a situation where the wise choice is to hold your tongue, in spite of the fact that you really want to say something, now, if you can, think like an inmate. Hold your tongue. Thank you for listening today.